Heard you roll the other lane, we are not the same couple.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
A wizard.
Dyslexic brains have some incredible cognitive gifts. These cognitive abilities are called your dyslexic mind strengths. There are 4 of them: material reasoning, interconnected reasoning, dynamic reasoning, and narrative reasoning. More on that later in this video. These abilities are the reason why some of the most brilliant humans in history have been dyslexics. Humans like Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, George Washington, Henry Ford. All these brilliant, fantastic humans are dyslexics. Although dyslexics have access to these incredible cognitive abilities, we don't understand how to leverage these abilities in useful ways to accomplish our goals. Most dyslexics don't get to use the dyslexic mind strengths because we don't have control over them. If you do, it's usually by an accident. It's kind of like in Harry Potter. Before young wizards go to Hogwarts, sometimes untrained wizards are able to do these amazing magic at random times, but they don't know why they did it, they don't know how they did it, and they don't know how they can do it again. The How to Dyslexia Academy is like Hogwarts for Dyslexia because it's designed to help you unlock your dyslexic powers and call upon them at will. There is a price that dyslexics have to pay for having these amazing cognitive abilities. There are some disadvantages of having a dyslexic brain and a dyslexic way of processing information. There are mainly 3 big disadvantages or challenges. There's challenges in reading, challenges in writing, and challenges in learning in a traditional way. And because our school systems are largely based on reading, writing, and learning in the traditional way, we really don't get to flex our cognitive abilities at school. We don't get to operate in our zone of genius because of how we've been taught in schools to consume information, connect that information to our existing knowledge base, and creating new products and ideas with that information. So we really don't get to step into our power. We really don't get to step into our zone of genius. See, the thing is, they teach dyslexics and neurotypicals the same exact way, and these traditional methods work really well for neurotypicals, but when we try to implement them, it's like a shoe that doesn't fit. It doesn't flow for us like it does with neurotypicals in a school setting or a work setting, because these settings are specifically designed by and made for neurotypicals. They don't work because the way we process information is completely different than neurotypical way of processing information. These processing differences are the reason why you feel like a fish out of water. I mean, you can feel it.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you.
Dyslexics see the world differently because we actually process the information from the world in a completely different way than neurotypicals. This disconnect between how you process information and how the world is built for neurotypicals is a reason why you feel so out of your element. It's a reason why you struggle to do things that seem so easy for neurotypical people. It's a reason why you always felt like you've been behind your whole entire life. It's a reason why you feel so unproductive. The reason why you have not been able to be successful before is because you've been using strategies and techniques and tools that were designed by neurotypical people for neurotypical brains for neurotypical processing. Now, let me repeat that one more time. The reason why you have not been successful before is because you have been using strategies, techniques, and tools that were designed by neurotypical people for neurotypical brains for neurotypical processing.
It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth?
And the truth is, you are not stupid. The genius of your brain is in the way that it's wired. In this video, I'm gonna show you exactly how your brain is wired. I'm gonna show you how you can take advantage of your incredible strengths, your dyslexic powers, and I'll show you how to bypass the challenges of having a dyslexic way of processing information. I'm gonna introduce you to the cybernetic knowledge engine, the system that I've developed tailor-made for dyslexics that will allow you to consume, connect, create, and communicate information effortlessly. It's gonna allow you to tap into your dyslexic powers at will and bypass the challenges that come along with having dyslexia. It's gonna help you take on any cognitive challenge faster than you've ever done before. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand why you think the way you think, how your brain works the way it works, and you're gonna have some strategies and techniques on how to take advantage of those processing styles. You're gonna understand how to work with your dyslexic mind rather than working against it like you've been taught at school to do your entire life.
Nowadays, nothing really excites me. Only one of me and nobody's like me. Phone ringing and I tell him it's ice. I got wifey on bling and she freeze. Photo.
Hi friends, welcome to the How to Dyslexia Academy. My name is Nishantha. I'm gonna be your host for this entire journey. Now, this is not your typical dyslexia program. Most dyslexia intervention programs are based on this old school premise that dyslexic brains are inherently dysfunctional. The foundation of these programs are dyslexic brains are broken versions of neurotypical brains, and they need to be fixed. These programs try to train the dyslexic brain to become a mediocre version of a neurotypical brain. The reason why these programs are the way they are is because they still prescribe to this very old school, outdated model of what dyslexia is and how it works. Now, the old school way of looking at dyslexia was that dyslexic brains have some neuroanatomical dysfunctions in the Broca and the cerebellum regions of the brain. And the Broca is the area of the brain that's kind of in charge of what's called phonological processing. Phonological processing is what helps humans use language to communicate with each other. Now, this area of the brain processes sounds and tones into meanings inside of our head. So whenever you're reading, writing, speaking, listening, this part of the brain does a lot of work. In the old school model of dyslexia, it was thought that this area of the brain was impaired. And that was the fundamental reason why dyslexic brains had a hard time doing what neurotypical brains could do when it came to language development. This impairment theory also said that the cerebellum of dyslexics were also impaired, and that's a reason why dyslexics have a smaller working memory, and it's slower for us to learn things than neurotypical people. Now, this impairment theory of dyslexia did a really good job explaining the challenges of being a dyslexic. You know, the challenges of consuming information, connecting that information to your pre-existing knowledge base, creating and consuming other types of information using that knowledge base. In school, difficulties with reading, writing, and learning were all pretty much explained via this impairment theory of dyslexia. In this theory that there was broken parts inside of dyslexic brains that were different from the whole parts that were inside neurotypical people. But there's more to this story of dyslexia than just the challenges. Some of the most brilliant humans that has ever lived on Earth have been dyslexic. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computers, currently the world's most valuable company. Albert Einstein, he discovered the theory of relativity. He was one of the architects of the atom bomb. One of the most preeminent geniuses of science of our time was a dyslexic. Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest creative thinkers of the Renaissance, was a dyslexic. Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motor Company and inventor of like the large scale assembly line, probably the father of modern industry in America, was a dyslexic. George Washington, one of the founding fathers of this country, of America, the first man to ever been elected democratically as the president, was a dyslexic. Now, all these wonderful, great humans in history have been dyslexic. So how do you explain the greatness of what these people were able to achieve if they had like this dysfunctional, broken brain? Like, these stories don't add up, right? What we now know about the neurology of dyslexia perfectly explains both the challenges and the advantages of the dyslexic brain. This new science, this new way of looking at dyslexia is called the microcircuitry theory of dyslexia. I'm gonna try to explain this model of dyslexia as simply as I can, as if you were one of my students in my 7th grade science class.
With the elevation, arm strong with the levitation. My third eye needed calibration. That was heat rock when I notated. I've been gone.
This is a neuron. A neuron is a type of cell that can connect with other neurons. Connected neurons can talk to each other using electrochemical signals. By connecting and talking in very specific ways, these neurons can work together to process information. Your brain is made up of over 100 billion neurons, and there are over 100 trillion connections between neurons. So that's a lot of different communication that's happening. This is your brain. Okay, well, it's not really a brain, it's a cabbage, but let's use it as a representation of a brain. Different parts of our brain can do different things. They can process different types of information. Some parts of the brain can process information about sight, the other parts of the brain can process information about emotions, other parts of the brain can process information about memory. So different parts of this brain has different things it's good at doing. Depending on how the neurons are connected to each other and the types of electrochemical signals they're using. Different parts of this brain can do different things. There's a thin layer that coats the outer surface of the brain. This layer of cells is called the cerebral cortex. This layer of the brain gives rise to some of our higher cognitive functions such as memory, language, problem solving, attention, conscious awareness, things like that. The cells in our cerebral cortex is organized into these functional units called mini columns. These mini columns are kind of like computer chips. They can process a certain amount of information by themselves, but they work really, really well when they're able to connect with other mini columns around them. Just like how computers can network with each other to process lots of data. The same thing happens in our cells through these mini columns. In any given population, some people have a very high density of mini columns in their brain, others have a medium density, and some have a low density of mini columns. There's something really interesting that happens to people who have a high density of mini columns. What happens is that these high density mini columns tend to be thinner and shorter, while the people on the other side of the spectrum, people who have a low density of these mini columns, tend to have thicker and they tend to have longer mini columns. This becomes really important on how these two different types of brains process information. So the people with the high density mini columns, these people with shorter and thinner mini columns, when they need to process information, these short mini columns can make connections with their neighbors around them. They're short, so they can only make connections with the other mini columns around them. These circuits are really dense, and when they process information, it's highly efficient and they don't consume a lot of energy. On the other side of the spectrum are the people that have long mini columns that are much more further spread apart, which means when these circuits process information, they're actually connecting to different parts of the brain. This tendency for mini columns to make connections with their neighbors around them or to connect with other mini columns long distances away has an enormous impact on how information is being processed. People with these shorter, more dense mini columns, they're really good at fine, detailed processing. They're really good at sorting and distinguishing between closely related things. They're really good at extracting information from specific objects or a concept. Brains that are wired with this short mini columns are highly skilled at detailed oriented tasks. On the other side of the spectrum are brains that make longer circuits. These brains are weaker at fine detailed oriented skills, but they're really, really good at big picture tasks. Examples of these big picture tasks would include things like synthesizing meanings from a concept, figuring out the relationships between concepts, objects, and ideas, making unusual but insightful connections between seemingly unrelated things. These long distance circuits are really good at problem solving, especially when those types of problems are new and novel and they can't be predicted. If the problems themselves are really dynamic, these long distance circuits are really, really fantastic at solving these problems. Although these long distance circuits are more energy consuming and less efficient at detailed oriented processing, they're really, really good at coming up with creative solutions to problems, doing things in new ways. These types of circuits are designed for creativity and innovation. See, what happens is when the short mini columns comes up with the solution is usually localized to a specific brain area. So only one part of the brain is processing that information to come up with a solution. But when the long distance circuits come up with a solution, that solution comes from different parts of the brain. So the circuit may involve some memory, maybe some emotions, maybe some sight, hearing, maybe some logic. All these different parts of the brain contributed to the solution. So the solution is going to be dynamic. It's going to be more creative. Most people have a normal density and amount of mini columns in their cerebral cortex. But the extremes are what's really interesting. Autistic brains tend to have mini columns that are shorter and higher in density. They make localized, highly efficient circuits to process information. While on the other side of that spectrum, dyslexic brains tend to have mini columns that are longer and lower in density. They make broad connections. These circuits are highly inefficient, but they're very creative and the way they process information and the preference of processing information is seeing the big picture in things. So these dyslexic circuits are not very good at fine detailed oriented tasks, but they're very, very good at broad, big picture oriented tasks. And this way of processing information is where all of the challenges of dyslexia and all the advantages of dyslexia comes into play.
A long day. I swear there's a better me around. Just gotta grab it. This is magic. This is switch from lost and found. Make my baggage do a backflip, stick the land and hit the town with my some songbirds who made our way out of the cave.
There are 4 major strengths or cognitive powers that dyslexic people have over neurotypical people. We're gonna dive a lot deeper into all 4 of these dyslexic strengths in the How to Dyslexia Academy, but let me just give you a quick overview right now. The first one is called material reasoning. Material reasoning is being able to hold an image of an object and then manipulate that object inside your brain, like designing a magazine, designing a building or app or a car or something physical entirely inside your head, and then manipulating it, taking some things out, putting some other things in, and holding the image of that object concretely as if it was real inside your head and manipulating it. The second strength is called interconnected reasoning. This means that you can take disparate things, objects, ideas, concepts, put them together in such a way that hasn't been done before. So you're able to see the relationships and similarities and how certain things fit together, even though there seems to be no connection between them. In Silicon Valley or in startup world, this type of thinking is called orthogonal thinking, and it's the ability to look at something in a completely different way, then look at something else in a completely different way, put those 2 things together to come up with something that hasn't been done before. Personally, this is my greatest dyslexic strengths out of all 4 of them. The third type of mind strength is called narrative reasoning. This is the ability to conceptualize an idea in a story. It's the ability to create a story when there's just ideas. Narrative reasoning uses episodic memory like a virtual reality simulator to solve problems and create new ideas and scenarios. The last type of mind strength is called dynamic reasoning. Dynamic reasoning is being able to look at a picture, object, concept, idea, event, or situation, basically facts and ideas, and create a prediction of outcomes that's going to happen as a result of these things interacting with each other. Its ability to accurately predict what will happen in situation when lots of different variables are involved. I know that was really quick. In the How to Dyslexia Academy, we will be studying these mind strengths in much more detail.
I hope the rain don't come in November, 'cause the summer went way too fast.
So if dyslexics have these incredible cognitive gifts, why don't we do good at school or at work? So in the traditional school system, you're consuming the information through reading. You're connecting that information through taking notes, and you're communicating that information by writing. You're demonstrating that you understood knowledge by taking standardized tests. So it's reading, writing, and note-taking. These are the 3 things schools based off of, and dyslexics suck at all 3 of these. It's a very difficult journey for dyslexics because the exact thing that dyslexics are really challenged by are the things that schools require to be able to do well in order to demonstrate your learning. So in kindergarten, you're learning the alphabet and the numbers. In 2nd grade, you're learning the elementary reading, writing, and math skills. In 4th grade, you're expected to do some read alouds. You're given homework assignments where you have to read, and that's kind of where dyslexic students start falling behind. This is when you usually get diagnosed with dyslexia. You get put into these slow classes or special education classes. This is when some dyslexic students get pulled into IEPs with their parents, teacher conferences, things like that. This is kind of when the school notifies the parents usually, hey, it looks like your student is having a little bit of issues with reading. Let's see what we can do to help them out. And this is about the time when you get told over and over again you're falling behind. You're not reading at grade level. You're not writing at grade level. This is kind of when you start realizing, hey, wait a minute. How come I'm not able to do all the things my friends are able to do? And constantly, over and over again, implicitly or explicitly, you get reinforced with this idea that you're the dumb kid in the classroom. Your friends can read, they can write, they can spell, they can follow directions, and they don't have a hard time doing their homework. But you do. This is when you hear things like, you're a smart kid, why aren't you doing better? Now you're in 5th grade. And in 5th grade, teachers expect you to show your thinking by writing. They expect you to explain something or event that happens. They expect you to summarize the paragraph. They expect you to kind of show your work in math. And language becomes not only the way to acquire knowledge, but it's also the way to demonstrate knowledge. So the problem is, even if you understood something, if you haven't mastered writing, it looks like you don't understand the content the teacher's trying to teach you. At this point, even if you know what's going on in the classroom, you still get bad grades. So when students go from elementary school to middle school, the teachers go from having 25 students in their classroom to 225 students that they're responsible for. You go from having one teacher to having 7 teachers. As a teacher, and I know this from experience, if you have 225 students in a day, you need a really fast way to give feedback to all those kids. So multiple choice testings becomes really important in middle school. And the difficulty with these multiple choice testing is that it requires a mastery of reading. Figuring out what the sentence is asking, then matching that question to an answer that's very similar to the answer that's inside your head. That becomes a huge problem because of how interconnected dyslexic people's knowledge bases are. Everything seems to be linked together. So when a dyslexic kid reads a question on a multiple choice test, they have lots of different ways of interpreting that question. Some of those interpretations make it so that the answers and the multiple choice tests don't match up with the interpretations that they have in their head. And when you're writing multiple choice tests, in order to really test the kids if they know what they're talking about, oftentimes the teachers will put tricky answers to questions that they ask. And these answers seem like they can fit, especially if you make a mistake reading or if you make a mistake with how you linked the reasoning behind these answers. So dyslexics fall for those tricky questions because of how our interconnected reasoning works. And interconnected reasoning is one of the biggest dyslexic strengths we have. But in this particular case, when we're taking multiple choice testing, this strength kind of backfires on us. Now we're in 9th grade. We're in high school. At this point, school becomes a competition to get into college. Now you're comparing yourself to every other student in your grade. You know, you're trying to get into AP classes. You're always looking at this number called the GPA. You're trying to get good grades on tests. And so oftentimes what happens during this period is your self-confidence and your self-esteem starts to tank because you're seeing all of your friends and peers having success in this competition in trying to get into school. And there is like this number that you're always seeing, like the GPA, and your number always seems to be lower than everyone else's, no matter how hard you're trying. So your confidence tanks because you can't compete with the other kids in your classroom because the system is kind of rigged against the dyslexic brain. We learn to accept the fact that we are not good enough to compete with the neurotypical students in our classrooms. We learn to accept the fact that we are stupid. We learn to accept the fact that we hate school and we hate learning and there's nothing we can do about it. So we just give up. The reason why we feel so stupid at school has nothing to do with dyslexia or how dyslexic brains process information. It has everything to do with the economics of books, multiple choice testing, and how our school systems are set up. Our school systems are largely based on reading, writing, standardized tests, and the goal of getting into college. Because in the beginning, you get this like really bright, smart, curious kid in kindergarten. And by the time this person is in 12th grade, they hate school, they hate learning, and they have low self-confidence and belief in their ability to do something with their lives. We start to believe that we're stupid early in school, and that idea keeps getting reinforced over and over and over inside of our brain. By the time you're an adult, you think that's reality. You think that's how the world works. You believe that you are a dumb person and you cannot do things as well as other people. I know this because this is something that I've experienced. So I grew up in Sri Lanka, and in Sri Lanka, they use elephants to do like physical labor, kind of like how people use horses here. But in Sri Lanka, they use them to like move like fallen trees and stuff like that, just to do things that, you know, they can't get tractors and big machinery into. And when I was a kid, it was really fascinating like to watch them train the elephants. So one day I went to the facility and I noticed that each of the elephants, the big giant elephants, had like this little ring around their foot with a little chain attached to it. So I asked the guy like, hey man, what's that for? And he just said, yeah, we use them to chain the elephants when we don't want them to like move around a lot. And I was just like, it was like really surprising because these chains were really small and the poles that it was like they were attached to was really like small too. And elephants are like huge, strong animals that can like move boulders and stuff like that. So I was like wondering like how does a little chain hold this giant elephant? So when I asked him that, the guy just took me to the back area where they were keeping the juvenile elephants, and he had a bunch of elephants kind of with the same chain, the same ankle chain attached to this like bigger pole. And he was just saying like, we train the elephants when they're really young on these chains when they don't have enough strength to move them. So as they get older, they forget how strong they are once they're attached to the chain. And that kind of blew my mind because I was just thinking like, man, these elephants are really like intelligent animals, but since they've been trained to be like linked to this pole, they forget how strong they are. And I was just thinking about this idea, and I think it's really fascinating because I think the same type of molding happens in our school systems. So in school, from kindergarten to 4th grade, you learn to read, and then from 4th grade to 12th grade, you're reading to learn stuff. And school is largely based around this one skill, which is reading. And this skill is something that dyslexics have a really hard time with. So from an early age, we've been constantly reinforced this idea that you're not able to perform this task, therefore you're like kind of inferior to the other students around you. And even after you graduate from school, like, you get out of school, that molding of feeling inferior, that molding of like thinking you're stupid, that molding of like thinking you can't do stuff, it's still there. Even though school and like life is fundamentally different. In life, it's not largely based around reading and writing. It's mostly based around like soft skills and like learning things and like perseverance and like your psychology and a bunch of different things, different skills that is more important than reading and writing. But since you were molded at such a young age to like feel like you're stupid, all the other things that are necessary for life is also like seemingly more difficult for you. Just like how a baby elephant, as they are, growing up, start believing that they're not strong enough to pull this pole out of the ground, and even when they're an adult, once they're chained to that pole, they no longer have it in their like brain to like pull it out, even though all day long they're like moving bricks and boulders and like moving trees and stuff like that, doing much more difficult things than just moving this like pole out of the ground. Once they get attached to that pole, they feel weaker. They feel like they can't do it. And I think the same type of thing happens to dyslexics as dyslexics move like out of like school environments into like work environments. When they get faced with any kind of reading challenges or any kind of writing or any kind of like new type of learning, I think they kind of freeze up and they go into this mode of learned helplessness because they've been kind of taught and molded in school that they're inferior to like their regular students. And it turns out there is research around this idea of learned helplessness. So they did some really interesting experiments to like study this effect. And basically what they did was they took some dogs and they put them in two different types of cages. So in the first type of cage, the door or the top of the cage was open so the dogs can jump out. And then the second type of cage, the cage was completely closed, so the dogs were kind of trapped in there. And what they did was they ran electricity to each of the types of cages, and then they would shock the dogs. And then the dogs that had the opening at the top would jump out and they would escape. And then the dogs that had the cage that was completely enclosed, they couldn't escape no matter what they did because it was like an enclosure. And they did this experiment over like months and months. And the interesting thing happened after they took the dogs that couldn't escape and then they put them in cages that had an opening. And then they tried to shock them. And even though there was an opening, these dogs who could escape didn't, because they learned to be helpless. They learned that no matter what they did in that situation, there's no helping it. They would just kind of took the shock and they would just kind of shut down and they would not try to escape. And it was really fascinating because it would take them a lot of time to retrain these dogs in order to jump out of the cage and get out of a situation that was hurting them. Unfortunately, I think this is something a lot of people who are dyslexic go through as they go through school. It's kind of like that experiment where they feel like there's an enclosure, there's nothing they can do to escape their situation. So whenever you're out of school and you're in life and you see these opportunities, you might not take these opportunities because of learned helplessness. You might not have the self-confidence to go after your dreams. You might not have the self-confidence and like the belief in yourself to accomplish the things that you want to do. You might not have like the confidence in yourself to like learn new things, to like read those things that you need to read, to communicate in the way that you want to communicate, make connections with other people, and like feel confident about who you are as a person. So I think there's a lot of self-esteem issues that come about because of how dyslexics grow up in school. I think there's a lot of confidence issues that come up because of how dyslexics are treated in school and how our experience in school. And also, I think there's a lot of underachievement, things that we could be doing that we don't do, and opportunities that we can accomplish that we don't take because we just are just lacking that confidence. We have like this learned helplessness around our intellect. We have this learned helplessness around our ability to do things that other people can't do. And then maybe there's even like this inferiority complex where we don't feel like we're smart enough to do certain things. You know, I totally used to feel like that.
I'm a dry land. Somebody tell me what the hell is going on. Then it hit me like an anvil. I must have known you would do this.
I came to America when I was 10 years old, so I was like already in like 5th grade when I came here. When I was having trouble reading, the teachers was just probably thinking like, oh, this kid's foreign, so he just doesn't know how to read English. But in reality, I didn't learn how to read Sri Lankan either. So because I was the foreign kid, people were just giving me the benefit of the doubt that it was just taking me a lot longer to read, and they were not really necessarily looking for dyslexia in my situation. And I think back in the days when I was going to school, which is about 10 years ago, like 15 years ago now, I think a lot less teachers and educators really understood dyslexia as much as they do now. So let's fast forward to high school, and now I'm in high school. I'm a sophomore. And this lady, the counselor, pulls me into her office, and she's like, "Yo, Nishanta, I've been talking to some of your teachers, and they think you should get tested for ADHD." And I was like, "What is that?" And she just said, "It's attention deficit disorder." And the only thing I heard was like deficit disorder. I was like, "Oh, I don't want that," because I was already feeling really insecure about not being able to read and like keep up with my classmates and stuff like that. And I came from like an immigrant family because I came here when I was 10, and my parents really wanted me to be successful at school because it was like our ticket, like my ticket to like become successful in life. And I really believed that at the time. I believed that being successful at school was equal to being successful in life. For my parents, it was such a huge deal for me to become like this successful person academically so I can become a successful person as an adult. So when I heard the word deficit and disorder, I was like freaking out, and I was like, please, 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 please don't test me. Because she was like, well, we gotta notify your parents, have them sign this piece of paper, and then we'll give you we'll give you a test or whatever. And then I just freaked out, and I was like, please, 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 please don't tell my parents about this thing that you think I have. I'll try harder at school. I just didn't want to get tested because I knew what the reaction my parents would have had if they thought I was like, if I got diagnosed with this like other thing called ADHD. They would have like been really disappointed. My mom would have like probably been like really ashamed of it. And there was like just like a lot of like intellectual insecurity I had back in those days. And I don't know, maybe my parents wouldn't have been like freaked out as much as that I thought they would have. But I know the immigrant parent mentality that my parents were having, especially my mom was having, and there was a lot of pressure for me to like try to be successful, even though like I was like really struggling with that kind of stuff. So my counselor was like, all right, well, if you don't want to take the test or whatever, we're not gonna force you. And she just like let me go, and I was like, oh, thank God. That was like, I just dodged a bullet there, and I tried really hard the rest of the year, and like so on and so forth. And I finally got to college. It's my last year at UCSB. It's where I went to college. And I'm taking this biopsychology class. And it's really hard. We're learning the mechanisms of how the brain upregulates certain chemicals and downregulates certain chemicals. And the tests are not multiple choice. It's a small class, and it's all written. And I would study so hard. And then when I try to go into the test and write down the things that are in my brain, I would freeze. I would make a bunch of mistakes. The spellings would be wrong. I mean, this is like a test where you have to memorize a bunch of facts and then apply those facts and information to a novel situation. So you have to like pull out a bunch of things out of your head and then like write it down on a piece of paper, and then you're judged on how well you're explaining yourself, like to solve the problem that the teacher wants you to solve. So it was really hard for me, especially because I had to memorize all those things. But the memorization wasn't the hard part. Like remembering all the facts and the knowledge wasn't the hard part. I actually knew the stuff. The hardest thing for me was I would just run out of time because it would take me so long to formulate the ideas in my head into the piece of paper. And I would always make so many spelling and grammatical errors that when the professor was like, or the TAs, when they were reading it, they were not actually like, they were not able to fluidly like read my answer and to see if I like understood the material. They were just like there was like these jarring like spelling and grammar mistakes that were like, that was just throwing them off. And anyways, that class was so hard for me, and there was so much pressure on me at the time because my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. And I thought if I didn't do that, if I didn't get into medical school, like my life would be like really bad. Like my life would be like completely terrible. So there's a lot of pressure on me. So one of the roommates I had at the time was a biochem major, and I was like, dude, like these science classes are so hard. They ask so many essay questions. How do you like come up with a comprehensive answer when you have so little time? And he's just telling like, dude, I have ADHD, and I went to the students with disabilities department, and if you have ADHD or any kind of learning disability, you get extra time on tests. And I was just like, what? Bro, we've been friends for years and you're just gonna tell me now that you get extra time on your tests? That's crazy. So after he told me that, I was just like, I gotta go check this out because I think this like thing will really help me out. So then I went to the students with disabilities office, and I was like, hey guys, when I was in like high school, my counselor wanted to get me tested for ADHD, but we never got it done. Like, what's the process of like getting this whole thing? The dude was like, hey, yeah, this is the process. You just got to go talk to a psychologist, get an evaluation to see if you have ADHD, and then you fill out some paperwork and blah 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 blah. Here's the whole process. So the first step was to going to see a psychologist who could kind of evaluate whether or not I had ADHD. So I went down to the office, and dude, his office was dope. It was like right on the beach. This dude was obviously very successful and very smart guy. He was an older dude, but like he was just, I don't know, he was like the idea that I had in my head of like, oh, okay, this is a psychologist. This is like a successful psychologist. So I went down to his office and he had me fill out some paperwork. And in the paperwork, there was like a section where I had to like write down a bunch of information about my life and like kind of like the story of like my like education history and stuff like that. And yeah, he gave me the ADHD test, and it turned out I was, I had ADHD, so I was really stoked about it because I was going to be able to get this extra time. But before I left the office, he's like, bro, hold up, let me talk to you for a second. So I was like, all right, what's up? And he told me, I was looking at your paper that you filled out, and it looks like you could be comorbid with dyslexia. A lot of people who have ADHD, who I test for ADHD, are also dyslexic. And I was like, bro, I don't even know what that is. I got my ADHD, I got my dyslexia thing, so I'm good. He's all like, no, let's just find out if you have dyslexia too. Yeah, so that way we know. We don't even have to do anything about it. I just want to give you like this test to see if you're dyslexic or not. So I was like, all right. So he had me do some stuff on the computer and like reading and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's kind of how I found out I was dyslexic, is on the same day that I found out I had ADHD. Now, at the time, I really didn't care about this dyslexia thing because all I really wanted was to get extra time to take these like really hard science tests. So I just took the ADHD thing and I showed it to the students with disability department, and I was able to get like extra time on certain classes for the rest of the semester because that was my last year of school anyways. So I kind of forgot about my dyslexia, and I was really more focused on the ADHD thing. So fast forward a couple of years, and I am now a 7th grade science teacher. It's my 2nd year. A student comes into my class. He doesn't look like he's having a good day. Usually when that happens, I like to try to, I don't know, I like to try to talk to the students to see what's going on, see if it's anything serious. So I was like, yo man, stay after class. And he's like, bro, I don't want to stay after class. It's lunchtime. I was like, come on, dude, just stay after class. So he stays after class, and I talk to him. And he's not having a good day because he just found out he's dyslexic. He just got a test or whatever that he found out he was dyslexic, and he thinks, and he said, bro, I'm stupid, I can't read, it's because I'm a dyslexic. And I just like, something clicked in my head. I was like, bro, wait a minute, I'm dyslexic too. So I started doing some research on like what dyslexia was after that kid said he was stupid, because at the time I was feeling like that too when I was in school. When I was in middle school, I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't keep up with the rest of my classmates. I was trying so hard too. And like every time I would try, I would like, the other kids would just lap me. So I just felt stupid like all the time, because in middle school, everything's based on like reading and writing. So it's really hard to get ahead. So I just started thinking about this idea, thinking about this problem, and I just did a bunch of research on dyslexia, and I found this book called The Dyslexic Advantage, and it completely changed my life. So after I read The Dyslexic Advantage, I was stoked on it. So I just talked to my student, and I kind of explained like how his brain worked, because all the stuff I was learning in that book was also new information to me. So I was like pretty excited to talk about it with him. And then next year, so year 3, I had another student who was dyslexic, and we were just like talking about it, and just kind of realized like a lot of kids are probably dyslexic and they don't have this information. So I made my first YouTube video about dyslexia, and this is probably how you guys discovered my channel as well.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
I think I got really lucky as a teacher, because the first teaching job that I ever got was at a school where every kid has a Chromebook. So it's like a one-to-one school. And it was one of the first schools in California to be like a one-to-one school. When I first started teaching, I had this cool opportunity to try to figure out how to use these Chromebooks to help my students learn a lot faster. And over the next couple of years, I became really, really good at it. And I became one of the best teachers in the country at using Chromebooks in my classroom. I was even recognized by Google as being one of the most innovative teachers at using Chromebooks. Became a part of this program called the Google Certified Innovators Program, where I went to Google and did a bunch of projects with the team there. So the most interesting thing I discovered while I was doing these experiments with Chromebooks was this idea that I started calling cognitive burden. So I don't know if there's like a real term for it, but I just started calling it cognitive burden. And the basic premise of this idea is that whenever you're processing some information in your brain, there's ways to make that processing easier or harder on the brain to do it. And you can lower the cognitive burden by using good strategies. You can increase the cognitive burden by using bad strategies and bad tools and bad systems. I really got deep into this idea of trying to lower the cognitive burden of my students while they were like using these Chromebooks and trying to learn science in my classroom. And I got really, really good at it. That idea of cognitive burden became like the seed of the cybernetic knowledge engine, the thing that I'm about to show you guys right now. So let's jump into my computer and I'll kind of walk you through what it is. Okay, so let's talk about cognitive burden. Whenever you're doing some kind of processing with your brain, so it could be writing, reading, spelling, making a video, whatever it is that you're trying to do with your brain, there is some energy required in order for you to complete that task. You can kind of think of it as like if you're bench pressing, it's like the amount of weight that goes into doing that exercise. So you can add more weight or less weight depending on the strategy and the tool that you're using in order to complete this task. So some cognitive tasks have like a low weight, while other cognitive tasks have a really high weight. So if you were trying to do like calculus, for example, that would be a lot harder than if you were just trying to do addition. Your brain needs to work a lot harder in order to like process that piece of information in order to solve that thing that your brain's trying to do. So there's a lot more cognitive energy, there's a lot more cognitive burden, there's a lot more cognitive effort that's required to do that more complex task. So whenever you're consuming information, whenever you're connecting that information to your knowledge base, and whenever you are producing something, whenever you're creating something out of information, you're using some kind of cognitive effort to do it. And the thing that I noticed with my students, whenever they were doing some kind of cognitive task, whether it was like reading, taking notes, or like writing something, for example, there will be a point in that process or workflow where they would get really, really slow. Like their brains would have to work really, really hard at a certain point, and that would slow down the whole process. So there was like a point in an assignment or a homework or a lesson where they would kind of get stuck and they couldn't move forward, or they would be so slow at moving through that part of the assignment that it would just make it impossible for them to finish it. And I started like noticing this over and over again in all the different lessons I was doing and all the different students that I was having. So I started thinking of this idea as like a cognitive bottleneck in their workflow. So in order to kind of explain what a cognitive bottleneck is, let me just show you what a physical bottleneck is, and then I'll bring it back to what a cognitive bottleneck is. Imagine that you're driving down the freeway like 70 miles per hour. You're going really fast. And then all of a sudden the cars in front of you start slowing down. Probably what has happened was there was probably a car accident like a half a mile or a mile ahead of you in the freeway. And some of the lanes that the cars in front of you we're going to use are no longer usable. There's like this bottleneck in the freeway. So what has to happen is all the cars kind of has to merge onto the other lane, the lane without the barrier, in order to move forward. So this part of the freeway has this bottleneck. So all the cars that are passing through this particular point in the freeway has to slow down in order to get through that bottleneck, get through that area where the car crash is happening. Now, the same type of thing is happening inside of people's brains when we're doing cognitive processes. And these cognitive bottlenecks are happening a lot more frequently inside of dyslexic brains than neurotypical brains, because the strategies, techniques, and the tools that we've been taught to use in school is not designed for dyslexic brains. So whenever we are doing cognitive tasks, we're using strategies that our brains are not really efficient at doing. So we're gonna run into a lot more issues when we're doing these things. As you guys know from the beginning of this video, our brains are not very good at fine, detailed, oriented tasks. So things like reading, which requires phonological processing, things like note-taking, which requires a lot of working memory, writing, which requires a lot of procedural learning, are all fine, detailed, oriented tasks. So when our brains are trying to do these, we're gonna run into a lot more bottlenecks. Let's say you're writing something, for example. When a neurotypical brain is trying to do this activity, it might be like 10 pounds of cognitive effort that they need to put into this activity in order to complete it very smoothly. Whereas when a dyslexic person tries to do that activity in the same exact way as a neurotypical person, that cognitive effort that's required for this dyslexic brain might be like 3, 4, 5 times as much. So it might be as if a neurotypical person is trying only lifting 10 pounds, whereas a dyslexic person has to lift 45 pounds to do the same activity. So you're gonna run into a lot more bottlenecks. So how do you solve this problem, right? So the cybernetic knowledge engine is specifically designed to take on this problem. It's designed to take this heavy cognitive burden and lower it so our brains could effortlessly go through this. I'm going to show you guys how to do that in a second. Let me just give you an example, and I think it'll kind of click into place once I show you this. So imagine you have this math problem, right? You have, it's a big number, adding another big number, subtracting another big number, adding another big number. If you try to do this just inside your head, it's a huge amount of cognitive effort that your brain has to do in order to like pull this off and find the solution. Your brain has to lift a lot of effort in order to do this, because you have to keep track of all these numbers. You have to like remember all these things. You got to keep track of the decimal place, and a bunch of different things start showing up into your brain. Trying to do this just inside your head would be pretty difficult. It would be like a pretty high cognitive effort that your brain would need to do. But if I was to give you like a simple tool, like a piece of paper, and then I taught you a strategy and a method in order to like solve this, then the cognitive effort will be a lot less, because now you can use a piece of paper to keep track of the decimal points, and you don't have to memorize a bunch of different things. And then you also have like a recipe or a step-by-step direction in order to solve this thing. So now we took something that was kind of difficult for our brain to do, and we lowered the cognitive effort by applying some tool and some strategy to it. Now, if you wanted to lower this even more, what you can do is you can apply like a intelligent tool to solve it. So what we did here was we took a problem which was kind of difficult for our brain to solve. It took a lot of cognitive effort to solve this, just using your brain. And then we applied tools, strategies, and intelligent systems to make that task a lot easier for our brain to do. Now I can do like thousands of reps of this because you took a 45-pound weight and you turned it into a 5-pound weight. So our brain could do that very easily. So this is the whole idea behind the cybernetic knowledge engine. We're going to use dyslexia-specific processes and strategies, combine them with intelligent tools to remove the cognitive bottlenecks in the workflows that dyslexics run into. What that's going to do, it's going to make it so that the areas where you used to get slowed down is going to be the areas where you're going to be able to move the fastest. So going back to this example of the freeway, it would be as if you were adding more lanes at the same time as you're removing the accident. So you can move like twice as fast because there's more lanes available for you. You'd have more bandwidth in these areas because you're automating some of these processes using intelligent tools and dyslexia-specific processes. So in the cybernetic knowledge engine, whenever you are consuming information, connecting that information to our knowledge base, or creating something with that information, you're going to be increasing the efficiency, speed, and the bandwidth in these areas so you can do this process a lot faster, whether it be reading, writing, note-taking, learning, taking standardized tests, making videos, writing stories, whatever it is that you want to do, there is a way to increase the cognitive bandwidth that's required to do this thing. So you can do it a lot faster than you would be if you were doing it without it. Essentially, what we're trying to do when we're building our cybernetic knowledge engine is we're trying to create a digital mind that will allow us to kind of automate some of these tasks that is harder for a dyslexic brain to do. So that way we can increase the bottleneck in these areas so we can move a lot faster. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know how to build a digital mind. Let me just walk you through it because it's not as complex as you think. The thing is, most of us already have a digital mind, but it just hasn't been purposefully designed to help us. So just let me tell you what it is so you can get an idea of the digital mind that we're going to be creating. So our brain already has 2 layers. We have our limbic system, which is the part of the brain that evolved first. And this is the thing that kind of keeps us alive. It's in charge of our emotions and our like autonomic nervous system and just things that the body needs to keep it alive. And then on top of it grew another layer called the cerebral cortex, and the cerebral cortex is the thing that helps us think. What we're going to be doing in this program is we're going to be building another layer on top of it that's going to help the cerebral cortex do its job a lot better than if it was just doing it by ourselves. And what I'm talking about when I say like most of us already have a digital mind is the cell phone. You know, cell phones allow us to, have perfect directions with Google Maps. It allows us to have perfect timing with like calendars and allows us to store like a bunch of information. It allows us to pull up a bunch of information from the internet. So it gives cognitive powers to the cerebral cortex that it wouldn't have had if it didn't have this like digital layer on top of it. If you were to ask me the capital of any country, I can literally have access to it because I have this digital mind and the internet to kind of access that information. Even though it's not in my cerebral cortex, I can access that, right? So what in this program, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a much more cohesive and purposeful digital mind that allows us to take on these cognitive tasks that have traditionally been really difficult for dyslexics to do in school. Once you have this digital mind in place with the applications and the dyslexia-specific strategies, you're going to be able to speed through cognitive tasks faster than ever before. So what I'm going to be showing you in this program is dyslexia-specific workflows for reading, writing, and note-taking, along with the stack of technology and the applications that will allow you to remove the cognitive bottlenecks in that workflow to allow you to do this stuff really quickly and really effortlessly. By the end of this program, you're going to be able to read better, write better, and take notes better than neurotypical people. So what you're looking at here is my writing stack. This is the tools and the applications that I use in order to help me write way faster than if I was writing like a neurotypical person. Obviously in the program, we're going to dive much deeper into like the exact process and how I use these tools in order to help me write way faster than if I was just doing it like a neurotypical person. The How to Dyslexia Academy is a 5-week cohort-based live course. Each week, we're going to meet 3 times. So session 1 is going to be the big idea or the theoretical explanation of why we doing the thing that we're doing this week. Session 2 is all about the class assignment for the week. I'm going to be walking you through on how I would tackle that assignment using the dyslexia specific workflows and the tools that I'll be showing you how to use for that week. Session 3 is going to be office hours where I give live feedback on the homework assignment for that week. That's kind of how the week is organized, and there's 5 weeks in the course. Week 1 is we're going to be diving into like dyslexia one-on-one. We're going to be really figuring out how our brain works and why it thinks the way it thinks. You kind of have a little bit of an idea from the video, but we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into it. And also we're going to be starting to build our cybernetic knowledge engine. We're going to start to put together the devices, applications, and the strategies that we're going to be using to tackle these workflows. Week 2 is how to consume information. And we're really going to focus in on the reading bottlenecks dyslexics have. I'm going to give you the exact workflow and the process that I use to read over 100 books a year. Week 3 is how to connect information to your knowledge base, and we're going to be focusing in on the note-taking bottleneck. I'm going to show you a way to take notes that will feel so intuitive to you as a dyslexic. You're going to be really surprised as how much information you can retain. Taking notes this way is not only going to be super effective, but you're going to really enjoy the process as well. I'm really excited to share that with you guys. Week 4 is all about how to create using information, and we're going to be really focusing in on the writing bottleneck. I'm going to show you a system and a process of writing that's unlike anything you've seen at school. Writing is actually going to become fun for you after you learn this system. In week 5, we're going to be combining all the ideas from the previous weeks to come up with a personal project for yourself. And I'll be doing one-on-one coaching sessions with you to help you bring this project to life. Along with the course, you're also going to get a private mastermind community exclusively for the How to Dyslexia Academy students. So even after the course is over, you can still be connected to the community and you can still have access to me to ask any questions that you want and any project that you're tackling. Cohort 1 starts on July 6th. It's limited to 9 students. The cost of the course is $499. Enrollment is open right now, but it is limited to 9 students. If you're interested, I would join this cohort. There's only gonna be 9 students in there, and the price of the course is only $499. The second round I do this for cohort 2, it's gonna have 36 students, and the price is gonna be $1,000. And probably for cohort 3, I'm probably gonna double the number of students and double the cost. I'm so excited about this program, you guys. I'm looking forward to getting to know the 9 of you that's gonna join us. I think this is gonna be such a transformative experience for you. Thanks for watching, you guys. See you guys on the other side. Bye.